Hello everyone, this is Savannah Bekowski, Project Assistant at the Syracuse University Environmental Finance Center. On behalf of the Environmental Finance Center Network, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar entitled Asset Management for Small Systems in Minnesota. From the next slide, you can see that I will be providing some technical support for today's session. Please take a moment to observe your GoToWebinar control panel. Most of the functions are self-explanatory, but I'd like to draw your attention to the questions section on your control panel. During today's session, you will all be kept on mute to ensure audio quality and minimize background noise. Should you have a question, please type it into the GoToWebinar question dialog box at any time throughout the session. Your question will be documented and asked during the Q&A segment of this webinar. We do have over 90 registrants for the webinar today, so we will try to get to as many questions as we can. Today's presenter has consented to share her presentation slides with you, and we will make the slides available as well as a video recording following the webinar on the EFCN website. You will receive a follow-up email detailing how to receive those materials. And from the next slide, you can see that we have a map of all the registrants. Thanks to all of you attendees who have joined us. And next, this session is one of several webinars conducted by the Environmental Finance Center Network for the Smart Management for Small Water Systems project. The EFCN provides training and technical assistance to small public water systems in all 50 states and 5 territories to help local water systems achieve and maintain compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act. And here you can see the various centers that make up the Environmental Finance Center Network. You can see that we have centers spread all across the country. And on the next slide, you can see the areas of expertise that the EFCN focuses on. Workshops, trainings, and direct technical assistance are provided on asset management, rate setting and fiscal planning, leadership through decision-making and communication, water loss reduction, energy management planning, infrastructure financing, workforce development, water conservation, collaborating with other water systems, resiliency planning, and managing drought. And at this point, I do have 2 quick polling questions for you. The first polling question is, what kind of water and or sewer utility do you represent? Please select from one of the following: a for-profit water system, a local government, either municipal or county level, a non-for-profit cooperative or association system, another water utility such as an authority or school, or you're not from a drinking water system. And we'll leave this poll open for about another 5 seconds. Getting ready to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. As you can see, a majority of our attendees today come from a local government water system. And the next polling question I have for you is, what size water and or sewer system does your utility operate by number of people served? Please select from one of the following options: small, or very small, medium, large, or very large, or from a non-drinking water system. And we'll leave this poll open for about another 5 seconds. Getting ready to close this poll in 3, 2, 1. As you can see, the majority of our attendees are from a small water system, followed by a very small water system, and we have a good chunk that evens out with a non-drinking water system. And at this point, I would like to turn the presentation over to our presenter. For our webinar today, we have Dawn Nall, Program Manager at the Southwest Environmental Finance Center. Dawn, welcome, and take it away. Do you mind, I'm sorry, Dawn, just re-hitting the play? It's just stuck on the poll question screen.
Okay. Did that take care of it?
It did not. I have one more quick. I'm just going to take presenter mode and shoot it right back over to you.
Okay.
Sorry about this. Thank you for waiting on standby. All right, Dawn, you're ready to roll.
All right, great. Thank you, guys. Sorry for that little technical difficulty there, but it looks like we're fixed and ready to go. I hope everyone's doing well this new year. We want to talk to you today a little bit about asset management and some tools that are available to help you with asset management. So we're going to start off with talking about the specific funding in Minnesota and then a tool that's specific to the state of Minnesota. So for Minnesota, there's water and wastewater funding that comes from state programs. Hopefully you're familiar with some of these programs, but we want to make sure that you know about them. So we have the Clean Water Revolving Fund, and of course that is for your wastewater and stormwater infrastructure funding. This is typically loan money that's available to you, and there are sometimes application deadlines and things of that nature, so the state has all of that information available on their website, and I'm going to provide you with some contact information on the next slide. So if you have questions or you would like to look things up on the website, all of that will be made available to you. And then there's the Drinking Water Revolving Fund, which is for drinking water infrastructure, and again is typically loan funding. Sometimes there's other types of funding available. Then you have your Point Source Implementation Grant. This is funding that's available that's a little bit different type of funding that not all systems really would be interested in or would apply for, but there is that funding available for pollutant-based grants. And then the Water Infrastructure Fund, this is a fund that's based on affordability. And then of course the federal program, you have USDA's Rural Development Program, and they have grants and loans for both drinking water and wastewater infrastructure. So here's that contact information. If you've got financial questions, you would need to get in touch with Becky, and her phone number and email address are there, and then the website for the PFA is there. And then for technical questions, for drinking water, you need to get in touch with Chad. And for wastewater or stormwater, you need to get in touch with Bill, and their names and phone numbers and email addresses are there. And then for the Rural Development Program, you have Terry's contact information. And again, these slides will be made available to you, so if you don't have a chance to write all of this down, hang in there, you'll get an email with a link. I'll leave this slide up for just a little bit so that you do have a chance to write down some phone numbers if you're interested. And of course, if you have any questions about the funding, feel free to contact these people in the state. Becky and Chad and Bill are all very helpful and willing to answer any questions you have. So in Minnesota, all of the funding partners do strongly encourage that you implement asset management at your drinking water programs or wastewater programs. So if you are not currently starting asset management or involved in asset management and you're looking for some funding, asset management is encouraged. All of the programs have worked to partner with the Minnesota Rural Water Association to develop an asset management spreadsheet. The website for that spreadsheet is on this slide. And they do have spreadsheets for both water and wastewater. So make sure that you check out the website, that you're familiar with the spreadsheet that the state and the Rural Water Association have worked so hard to develop for you. And they wanted to make sure that you are aware that the spreadsheet is intended for very small systems, and that rural water staff can help you if you have any questions about it. We do have lots of other tools that we're going to talk about today, so if this spreadsheet doesn't meet your size requirements or your needs, hopefully some of the other tools that we'll talk about today will be helpful to you as well. So once again, I'm going to leave this here just for another minute so you can write down that website if you need to. Make sure that you're familiar with that spreadsheet. And then all of the other tools that we talk about today will be available on the EFCN's website or specifically the Southwest EFC's website, and those websites will be throughout the presentation. So hopefully you'll get a chance to note those too. So speaking of the EFCN's website, this is our web address. And from this web address, you can do just about anything we offer under this program. So we have a program that allows you to offer free technical assistance. What that means is that we will work with you up to around 20 hours. We won't cut you off at the 20-hour mark if we're still in the midst, but around that time frame, to help you with any of those topics that we presented earlier, including asset management. Also, we list funding information by states. So I know we do have some people on today that aren't from Minnesota that may want to know more about their state revolving funds, things of that nature. So you can go to our website and find that information. So for the funding tables, this is what our homepage looks like. You would click on that resources and then that yellow box, funding sources by state. And you would get the map that pops up. You would pick your pick your state on the map, and the funding table for your state will come up. We try to update those about once a year. once every year or two, depending on what we know about the state contacts and how things are going there. But we do try to keep them current. We put the date that they've been edited or updated on the sheet so that if someone's email address is bad or a phone number doesn't work, you can let us know and we can work on updating it again. But we do keep those updated pretty regularly. And then for that free technical assistance, again, from our homepage, you would click on Assistance, and where that yellow box is, Request Assistance, this little form pops up. You fill in your information about your water system, and that gets handed off to one of our experts in the topic area that you select. So if you select asset management, there's a good chance that it's going to come to me, and we will work together to help you start developing your asset management plan or answering any questions you have about inventory or condition or anything to do with asset management. So we hope that you will take advantage of this free assistance as you go through your asset management process. So we're going to talk a little bit today about what asset management is before we dive deep into the tools, just to kind of refresh your memory and give you an overview of what asset management entails and what it includes. So the asset management thought process does consist of these 5 core components. You've probably heard of them before. If not, but we want to make sure that you're familiar with them. And if you have heard of them before, we want to refresh your memory. So those 5 core components include the current state of the assets, level of service, criticality, life cycle costing, and long-term funding. And I'm going to talk about each of these 5 core components briefly. And then if you have more questions about them, would like to talk to me about them, would like to learn more, we have lots of resources available on our website. We've done webinars on each individual core component. We've done webinars on benefits, on lots of different things. So if you'd like to view some of our webinars, our historical webinars, we can send you that information, or we can just talk on the phone, whatever works for you the best. So the first core component of asset management, and I'd like to point out that this is a circle, it is a cycle. You don't have to do one step before you move on to another. They are interrelated. You will find yourself kind of thinking about one while you're doing the other, or doing more than one at a time. So whenever I say first, second, third, I don't mean that that's the order they have to go in. It's just the order we present them in and discuss them. So I just want to make that clear before we go on. But that first core component I do want to talk about is current state of the assets. So when you're looking at your assets, you have to know what you own. And sometimes people chuckle at that, but in the water industry and in the wastewater industry, a lot of our assets are out of sight, buried. So do we know what we own? Do we have a good map? Do we know where those assets are located? So having a good map of your assets is something that we are going to talk about in a webinar in just a couple of weeks about the benefits of having a good map. If you're interested in that, make sure you go to our website and register for the webinar. Again, it's free, and you can learn about the benefits of mapping through that webinar. But having a good map, knowing where your assets are located, is something that we typically don't have in our water and wastewater utilities that's thorough and can help us answer questions about what we should be replacing, where we should be investing our money. So that's one of the questions we have to answer. And then the next question, what condition is that asset in? So when we talk about condition, one of the things that we want to make sure that we do is define what our words or our rankings mean in advance of starting the condition assessment process. We can modify it if we're learning that some things need to be included and some things don't, but being consistent in this analysis so that anyone in the utility knows what good means or what a for means, so that they have good definitions behind them is very important. So when you start looking at assessing the condition of your assets, you will want to have a meeting with your asset management team and start to define what is a good fire hydrant, what is a fair fire hydrant, what is a poor fire hydrant. So from those definitions, you can then have multiple people doing the assessment and get the same results. If you don't have that definition up front, I may think that that fire hydrant's good, and you may think that it's poor, and we're both looking at the same asset. So your good and my good may not be the same without those definitions up front. So I would encourage you to think about defining your conditions before you start your assessment. Then you have to ask, what is the remaining useful life of that asset? What we mean by that is, how long is that asset going to be able to do what we need it to do, to provide the level of service that we say we offer? So how much longer will that asset last before it fails? And then what's the replacement value? And when we're doing asset management, we're looking at replacement value sometimes differently than our accountants might or our financial people might. We want to know what it would cost us to replace it at the time that we plan to replace it, and with the type of material we plan to replace it with. So if right now you have manual read meters, but your plan is to replace those meters with those radio read meters, we don't care about the cost for manual read meters. We care about the cost for radio read meters. So you might have historic information, other depreciation information on the existing asset, but we care about what we plan to replace it with, and when do we plan to replace it, so we can include some inflation or some projections, what it would cost now if we replaced it now, and then project as we're planning long-term funding down the road. So we want to know their replacement value, and it's the same for any type of material. So if we currently have ductile iron pipe, but we plan to replace it with PVC, or if we currently have a metal storage tank and we plan to go to a reinforced glass line storage tank or something of that nature, we care about what our plans are. So make sure that you're aware of that when you're starting to look at replacement costs. The second core component I want to talk to you about is our level of service. So when we talk about level of service in asset management, essentially we're talking about customer service. What level of service can we provide to our customers? What do our customers expect, and what are we capable of? And we want to make sure that our customers understand what level of service we're capable of providing. We want to communicate with our customers. We want to know what our customers expect. Sometimes we think our customers want one thing, and it turns out they really don't. So are they paying for something that they don't really care about, or are we trying to respond to a report of a leak faster, but what they really want is to be notified that their water is going to be turned off? So we want to have communication with our customers. This is where our customers learn about us and we learn about them. And the relationship between service and cost really becomes clear here. Of course, if you have hard water and your customers would really like it to be softer, that's altogether possible, but it costs money. So a higher level of service typically leads to a higher cost. So sometimes your customers will say, yes, we're willing to pay another $1.50 a month to get rid of that hardness. Or sometimes they'll say, nope, we're okay with hard water because I'm not willing to pay more than I already pay. So it helps the discussion about why they get what they get for what they pay. And here you want to define the goals of your utility. So what level of service will you provide? And I have that little acronym on the side there that when you're setting goals, you want those goals to be SMART goals. So you want them to be specific. You want them to be measurable. And, you know, sometimes we kind of skip that measurable step. But if we don't make them measurable, we can't show if we're meeting them or not. So make sure that they're measurable. We want them to be attainable. We don't want to set pie-in-the-sky goals that we'll never meet. And of course, we want them to be relevant. And when it's appropriate, we want them to be time-bound. So if we have a goal of reducing our water loss by 3%, we want to set a time on that. And we want that time to be attainable and again, relevant. We wouldn't say we want to reduce our water loss by 10% in the next 6 months. That's not attainable. So maybe in the next 3 years is something that would be more attainable and time-bound. So make sure that when you're setting your goals that you think about this acronym, and if they meet each criteria of the SMART goal setting. The fourth core component of asset management is criticality. So whenever we're looking at our assets, we have to figure out a way to prioritize which assets should receive which type of money. So this portion of asset management helps us to prioritize our assets and our spending. To do that, we have to ask ourselves two major questions. What is the likelihood that an asset will fail? So is that asset really close to breaking or failing, or does it have a lot of expectation left for it? And sometimes I say for the consequence, what is the consequence if the asset fails? If the asset fails, would I want to get out of town and quit my job and retire tomorrow, or do we just fix it and move on? So what's the consequence? So you can rank those and start to determine which assets are the most critical and which assets carry the most risk. So if you see the little chart on the right, the higher the consequence and the higher the likelihood of failure, the higher the risk of the asset, or the more critical that asset is to receiving some attention and to making sure that it does not fail. So it helps you to have a very visual explanation as to why you need to invest into particular assets. So this portion of asset management we find to be very helpful in communicating with our decision makers about why we need funding and what the risk is that we're carrying. So this core component helps us determine and prioritize our assets, determine where to spend our money by prioritizing our assets. The fourth core component is life cycle costing. We have a tendency to look at assets based strictly on their capital cost. So which pump costs the least, and that's the pump we buy. And we fail to look at which pump is going to cost us more to operate over its life, to maintain, to repair, to rehabilitate, and then ultimately to replace. So with asset management, we want to change that mentality of just looking at the upfront capital costs and start looking at the cost of the assets over their life. And then we want to optimize those costs. So to get started, you have to start tracking some cost history, but you also need to start looking at operations and maintenance, your budgets, and start to balance O&M with repairs and replacements. So instead of just operating something to failure and replacing it, we want to introduce the concepts of having O&M schedules, looking at maintenance, looking at your maintenance budget, and figuring out ways to optimize each of these portions of life cycle costing. So the way that we operate, are we operating energy efficiently? Do we understand our energy bills? Do we have high water loss? Do we understand our water loss? And then when we look at maintenance, how are we maintaining? Do we have a maintenance schedule? Do we have a maintenance budget? And then ultimately, when we look at capital projects, is it better to repair something or rehabilitate something than to replace it and try and extend the life of that asset before we have to invest in it with a big capital budget again? So we want to look at optimizing those life cycle costs. And finally, long-term funding. We have to know what our funding needs are, what are our day-to-day expenses, and we have to know what our capital expenditures are going to be. This is capital improvement projects or CIP planning, putting your CIP together, looking at your long-term expenses. And then we have to know where that money is going to come from. For O&M, for our day-to-day costs, that money is going to come from our general funds, from our rates, from our fees, typically from our customers. We're not going to get money from outside sources for our day-to-day operations. For capital projects, it can come from system funds, and hopefully we start to have some revenues and set-asides for capital projects, and it can come from outside funding as well in the form of grants or loans. If you take on a loan, of course, you do take on that debt. Ultimately, that comes back to your customers and your rates. So you have to look at your rates and make sure you can take on that debt. So those are the 5 core components, a quick kind of overview. Why would you want to do asset management? Why would you want to take this on? It seems like it might be a lot of work, and I agree. It's going to increase what you feel is your workload up front, but ultimately it will make life easier in decision making and prioritizing and doing maintenance instead of being reactive all of the time. So why would you want to take on asset management? We find that there are lots and lots of benefits. So several different types. Efficiency. Do you want to work efficiently? Do you want financial efficiency? I haven't met anyone that says, nope, I like spinning my wheels. So working efficiently, reducing your field time. You don't have to look for your assets if you have a good map. You know what your spare parts are, you know where your spare parts are, and you know that you can get to them easily. You know which O&M task you're going to do and when, and which ones not to do and not to bother with. So you're doing maintenance, it's extending the life of assets, and it's reducing the amount of firefighting that you're doing, waiting to see what breaks and fix it. So work efficiency is one of the benefits of asset management. Financial efficiency, you're spending your money where it pays off. So you have investments in maintenance, which pays off in long-term savings. It's been shown, it's been proven that operating the way that a lot of our systems operate, by letting things run to failure and then replacing them, is significantly more expensive than doing maintenance, extending the life of the assets, getting the most out of them, and then ultimately replacing them. Financial efficiencies can come from your energy, looking at places that you can reduce your energy use. There are lots of ways that water utilities are spending money on energy that could be saved. And we have whole programs on that we'd love to talk to you about as well. Water loss reductions. If you don't understand your water loss, if you've never completed a water loss audit, we'd love to work with you on that too. So all of those lead to financial efficiencies. Also, with asset management, we tend to have fewer accidents, more efficient operations, better customer service, and ultimately we're a more sustainable utility. We have improved emergency response, another benefit of asset management. We're seeing more and more of these types of situations where we're dealing with natural disasters. We have lots of pictures up here of flooding, but we're also dealing with fires and drought and other types of natural disasters or things that require some type of emergency response. And if you don't know where your assets are located, or with the snow and the freezing, how do you find a fire hydrant or a valve if you don't have a good map? And if it's an emergency situation, minutes count. So knowing where those assets are located allows for a quicker response time and a quicker resolution of the problem. That's always a benefit. And then some other benefits we just want to mention. With asset management comes enhanced communications. Our customers have a greater acceptance of their rates because they have a better understanding of what they're paying for. We have an improved CIP process. So a lot of times our CIPs are a wish list. It sure would be nice to have a new mechanical bar screener. But is that really where we should be investing? So our CIP process becomes fact-based. It's prioritized based on that risk analysis, and it's time-defined based on our needs for the life cycle, or how long is that asset expected to last. So as we go through asset management, CIP becomes very fact-based, and a fact-based CIP is much easier to present to a decision maker or a funder than a wish list. And we have improved knowledge management. At so many of our systems, we have one or two guys that kind of know everything there is to know about our system. They've worked at our utility for many, many years. They've learned so much. They're so valuable. These employees we have to have around, but they would like to retire at some point. And for a lot of our operators, that point is coming up soon. So getting the knowledge from their heads into an organized database or spreadsheet or information management system is so important, and asset management helps us get there, so we get that knowledge transfer. So those are some of the kind of side benefits, so to speak, of asset management. Who does asset management benefit? It benefits everyone that's involved. Our customers benefit. They have typically a higher level of service. They understand what they're paying for, so it increases their willingness to pay. It benefits our governing bodies because now they have fact-based data to make decisions upon, and they can understand better why the money is needed. And of course, it helps our operations and management staff with knowing what to do day to day, where to spend the money, what we need to be planning for, and having a picture of what's to come. So asset management benefits everyone in our team, and we think that anything that benefits all three parties is obviously worth investing in. So now we're going to go to some of the tools that are available. So the Southwest EFC's website is here on this screen. The EFC Network website was at the beginning of the presentation. Most of the tools can be accessed from both places. We are updating some of the tools. So right now, the website that's on your page is probably the easiest to get the most current, but we are working constantly to make sure that both pages have good links and have everything that's listed here today. So you should be able to get to it from either website, but if you would like to write this one down to be certain, it could be helpful. So overall asset management, we have a couple of tools that I want to talk to you about. The first one is our AM Can Work manual or guidebook. This guidebook was created in partnership with the state of Kansas, thus Can is spelled with a K, and they have graciously allowed us to share it with anyone and everyone. The guidebook walks you through the core components. It has appendices that have a lot of tools and examples of things that can be used to help you in the asset management process. It also includes videos. When we were creating the manual, we were asked to interview systems that were doing asset management and film them. And we have put those video clips throughout the document so that you can hear how other people have done asset management. And they're typically short clips, so you can say, I kind of have a question about this. It sure would be helpful to talk to someone else. Maybe there's a video clip that answers that question for you. So those are throughout the document as well, and that can be found on our website and is available to anyone to use at absolutely no cost. As part of the Asset Management Manual, we also created the Asset Management IQ. It is available in the document or as a separate standalone download on our website. The Asset Management IQ is useful in a lot of ways. We find it to be very helpful to use as a baseline tool. Establish where you are right now by going through this IQ assessment. The assessment includes questions on your overall asset management and then each core component. And as you can see here, a question is asked. You pick an answer, you click the box, and it gives you a score. And it tallies your score at the end for each section and then overall. And then maybe 6 months to a year after you've started the asset management process, you can take this assessment again, and it shows your progress. And it shows where your strengths are and maybe where your weaknesses are or what you should be focusing on next or where you need to grow. This assessment is also very helpful if you do request assistance, the free technical assistance. I will typically ask you to take this assessment first and send it to me. I look it over, and then we will have a conversation about where we feel like we can help you the most. So this Asset Management IQ gives you your baseline and helps you show progress, which can be really beneficial in communicating with your decision makers and communicating with funders to show progress. So we have this tool available on our website. And again, everything on our website is at no cost to you. It's there, it's available, you can go download it right now. Hopefully you'll wait until the webinar is over though. So the Asset Management IQ is there as an overall tool. Then when we get into the core components, we do have tools for each core component. So again, that first one we talked about, current state of the assets, is where you start developing your inventory. So we have some tools that help you go through that inventory process. When you start your inventory process, you have to determine a few things. You have to determine what assets you're going to track. So do you want to track everything, or is there a cutoff? There may be a monetary cutoff. You may say anything under $1,000 is just part of our general budget and we're not going to track it, or it might be $10,000, or it might be $100, depending on your utility, the size of it, and what type of assets you own. There may be asset categories that are valuable or that aren't valuable that you decide that you're not going to track. So you may want to track the meters for customer use, but not track the meter cans. So you may make that decision. We're not going to track meter cans. We don't need an inventory of meter cans. We know every meter has a can. It's part of it. So we're just going to track meters. Or you may have an existing software, a billing software or a maintenance software, and you may want to track your inventory based on your existing software so that you can continue to use that software and grow that software to do more asset management tracking for you. So there are different ways to determine what you want to track. These are just some examples. You may come up with others, but that's absolutely fine. But before you start tracking every nut and bolt, you should have this conversation about what makes sense to track and what does not. You want to know where you're going to store the data. How are you going to store it? There are lots of different ways you can store it. You can use pen and paper. You can use a spreadsheet. You can use a database. You can purchase a product. There are lots of products on the market, and there are lots of people that would be happy to sell you their product. We recommend that you start with a simple spreadsheet. Unless you're very small, then you can even start at the pen and paper level. But starting with a spreadsheet allows you to figure out what's useful and what isn't. And deleting a column, adding a column is not very complicated in a spreadsheet. But if you purchase a software package and you decide that you need a new bell but you don't need that whistle anymore, sometimes that can be really difficult to overcome in a pre-packaged software. So we think that starting with a spreadsheet is really wise, getting your feet wet, figuring out what's valuable, what's not, and then having a discussion about, should we move up to a database? Should we purchase a product? There are some free products out there as well. EPA has the CUPS program, the checkup program for small systems, and other programs that are out there. So there are other softwares. And of course, at the very beginning of the webinar, we talked about the spreadsheets that are available from the state that were developed with rural water. So make sure you check those out if you're a small system. And then we want you to determine how to consistently number those assets. We want to make sure that you think about using a smart numbering system. And this time I don't mean smart in the acronym sense, but in the sense of have your ID number tell you something about the asset. So we suggest including a location abbreviation in the ID number, an asset type abbreviation in the ID number. So it might be PMP for pump, and then MN for Main Street, and then a number, or GV for gate valve, and then a street location, and then a number. And that way your ID numbers can be sorted and quickly identify assets by category, maybe even by size and by location. So it's a quick way to be able to find an asset. It also tells someone something about the asset. So if you say you need to work on fire hydrant number 52, that doesn't tell me a lot. But if the ID number has a location in it and an asset type in it, then I know exactly what you're asking me to work on. So if you want some examples of smart ID numbering schemes, that manual in the appendix has examples, the AM Work manual. So if you go and take a look at that, you can find some examples of doing some smart numbering. The tools that are available for the inventory include this reference guide. The reference guide has two different parts to it. So it does inventory and then it does risk. So for inventory, when you're looking at figuring out what you want to include and what you don't want to include, we have some suggestions. So this table says, okay, for this type of asset, there are these things that we think you should definitely collect. That's the necessary data category, and then some optional. And you can go through and say, well, you know what, we don't have warranty, we don't do warranties on this asset, so we're going to mark that off the list. Or color, that's not important to us. But for fire hydrants, color maybe is important to us, and we didn't think about that. So this table is just here for you to kind of circle what you want to include and mark off what you don't. It's to get you thinking about what should be included in your inventory spreadsheet or data tracking tool that you choose to use. So we have this broken down by asset category. So you can see a table like this for valves and a table like this for pipe and for pumps, and they don't look all the same. Some are similar, but not everything is the same on each table. So you can go through and kind of think about, what do we want to collect? And this helps you get started to get those wheels turning. Another thing that we have available, we do have some generic spreadsheet and a generic database. And by generic, I mean we haven't put any logos on it, we haven't put any names on it, we haven't filled in any data. It's there for you to add to or take away from as you see fit. So we have a spreadsheet in Excel and a database in Access that's available. And then, as I mentioned, we do have a webinar coming up on mapping and the benefits of mapping. And we can talk to you about mapping and doing an inventory through mapping, and some of the things that you might want to consider if you're planning on starting down the mapping road very soon. So we can offer assistance there. So those are, again, available for download. The two Microsoft products are available for download, and then the assistance is just that request for assistance. When we get to level of service, when you think about level of service, again, remember that we're talking about customer service. This is where we're defining goals. So as you look at defining goals, what kind of goals should you write? We do not want you to put together a book. We want you to put together a handful of goals that are really solid, 5 or 6 goals maybe to start with. So when you think about writing those goals, you need to have some good documentation for them. You need to think about what's needed to measure if you're meeting those goals, and then how frequently should the information be collected. And if you say, well, we want to do it monthly, you need to think about, is that practical? Is it practical to measure it monthly, and is it beneficial? And then what are the results of the measurement? You need to keep track of that. And then in the end, determine if you're meeting your goal or not. So we've created some tools to help you with that process. We have this document that gives you guidelines, categories, and example goals. And it walks you through a little bit about what you should be thinking about with setting level of service goals and what the categories are, and then gives you some examples for each of those categories. We find that most level of service goals fall in one of these categories. So we've got public health and safety, we've got drought and demand management, we've got response time, we've got system maintenance. So these 7 categories are defined and discussed in that document, and we find that almost all of our level of service goals fall into one of these categories. If you figure out a goal that isn't in one of these categories, that's okay. Again, this is just a tool to help get you started. So these are not limitations, these are starting points. And then we also have a table that shows an example of how you can measure those goals and keep track. So it gives you some of those example goals that are in the document we've put into the table, and we show how it would be tracked, what kind of data we need to track it, how frequently we would track it, and then if we're meeting the goal or not. So just an example of a table that you could use to track your goals. Then we get into criticality and risk. So we start to look at which assets are the most critical. When we look at that, we have to ask ourselves, how likely is the asset to fail? Well, we want you to think about asset failure not just in the sense of mortality, which is how we typically think of an asset failing, but also in the sense of level of service. If we want fire flow, but we only have 4-inch pipe, that asset cannot meet the level of service. We also want you to think about capacity failures and financial inefficiencies. So we have more clamps on the pipe than we have pipe. It's probably time to replace the pipe. So we want you to think about failure not just as it breaks, it's met its mortality, but in these other ways as well. And then when we think about assessing the consequences, what are the consequences if the asset fails? We want you to think about the triple bottom line, which is financial, which we tend to think about frequently. What's it going to cost us to fix it? But we also want you to think about environmental consequences and social consequences. So if your failure causes the media to be there filming because a school bus fell into a sinkhole, the social consequences may be much higher than the financial consequences. So we want you to think about all three when you're assessing the consequences. To help you do this, again, that reference guide is available that helped with the inventory. It will also help with risk analysis. So we look by asset category. Each table gives you a list of characteristics that you would probably want to think about when determining both probability of failure and consequence of failure. And again, the things in this table are to help you get started. They're not meant to be limiting. So if you think of other things and you want to add them to these tables, you're absolutely welcome to. And in fact, we'd like you to share them with us if you come up with other things so that we can continue to help other utilities as well. But if you're looking at fire hydrant and you say, okay, how likely is it that that asset's going to fail? Well, of course, you want to take into consideration age, but we also want you to take into consideration other things like the condition of it and the frequency of its use. Has it ever been opened before, or has it just been sitting there for 10 years? Do we do any maintenance on it? Is it connected to the right size pipe? Do we have the tools that we need readily available to be able to open it? And then the consequence of failure, of course, the inability to fight a fire would be one of the biggest consequences, but also you would want to think about the ability to flush the system if that hydrant wasn't there or wasn't usable, if there would be any damage to nearby structures if the hydrant failed, or if there would be any level of service failures. So these help you to think about, okay, consequence, probability, and then to score that or rank that to put it on that risk chart. Once you've done that, you can score it. You can say, okay, we give the probability of failure, it's a moderate probability, so we're going to give that a 3. And the consequence is a 5, very high, so we're going to circle the 15. Now we can put the 15 on the chart. So this tool is available again in our AMCAN work manual. So the risk reference guide is available for download, and this is available in the AMCAN work manual. The life cycle costing, again, we want to think about optimizing life cycle costs in operating, maintaining, and then dealing with capital projects. So when we're looking at operating and maintaining, do you currently have a good maintenance plan? If not, there is an updated O&M tool available. We've been working with EPA to update. Some of you may remember many years ago the preventative maintenance program that came in a black box, like a black acrylic box. And so we've turned that into a PDF document that allows you to interact with it, print it out, write on it, or keep it in your computer, take notes, what have you. So it is available right now in beta. EPA is finalizing their review, and hopefully it will be available in final version very soon. It has many, many pieces of information in it, but some of them are like this. It's just a simple daily checklist. So you go through, and in the PDF you can check those blue boxes, and a little check shows up so you know it's been taken care of. And it has recommendations for daily, weekly, monthly, semi-annual, and annual operations and maintenance type duties. And it has information about what you should be doing. It has some guidance information. So that's available to you if you currently don't have a good maintenance program in place. We also have this tool that we've created that's a replacement valuation tool. What this does is give you a very high level kind of ballpark figure of what it would cost you to replace your utility today. So what is the value of your utility if you had to replace it today? This isn't meant to be used for bidding. This isn't meant to be used to tell someone it would cost us this to build this tomorrow. It's meant to be a very high level, big picture idea of what it would cost you to replace your utility today. Most of us don't know that number. And if we don't know that number, how can we know if our maintenance budget is appropriate? Most of us probably don't have a maintenance budget that's even 1% of the total value of the assets that we own. When we think about that, and we think about the need for maintenance, it helps us to justify a maintenance budget. If it's cheaper to maintain assets than it is to continually run them to failure and replace them, but we don't have a maintenance budget, this can help justify it. So this is a quick little tool. You put in how many feet of pipe you have, how many valves you have, how many gallons of storage you have, and treatment and pumps and so on, and it gives you a value. This is based on published data for replacing assets, bid tabs, other types of information that's published. We did try to look nationally so that it represents all of our regions, and we did give a range. So we have a low value, a high value, and then we calculated the median from those two. And also let you put in a known unit price. If a neighbor just replaced some pipe and this is what they paid to do it per linear foot, you can put that in instead of using our bid estimates. So, but if you don't have a known unit price, it does give you a low, a high, and a median, and you can kind of look where you feel like you fit in to get an idea of what your system is valued at for replacement. So that tool is available to you to download. And then long-term funding. We do have some tools available to help you figure out your rates, to figure out how you would fund something if you took on some debt, what you would need to do with your rates, so on and so forth. So we have on the EFC Network's website, in our resource library, that website's available, but of course you can just go to efcnetwork.org, and from there you can find all of our resources available. But we have a water rate checkup tool. We have a affordability tool to look at if we changed our rates, how would it impact our customers, especially our lowest income customers, and how does it impact affordability. We have a financial health checkup tool and many other tools available, but those were some I kind of wanted to highlight. Also, last year at about this time, the EFC Network did a webinar on funding. So that webinar is available. The slides are available. The recording of the webinar is available. And that's the specific link at the bottom here to get to that specific webinar. Again, we will make the slides available, so if you don't get this all written down, that's a lot of words and hyphens. You will get a copy of it, so you can find that webinar very easily when you get the copy of the slides. Okay? So that wraps up the tools that we have available. If you have questions about asset management, about the asset management tools that are available, feel free to type them in, and I will do my absolute best to answer them. And while we are talking about your questions, I wanted to let you know that we also have a blog. So I'm going to leave this blog address here so you can note it while we're talking and taking questions. So Savannah, have we had any questions come in?
So as of right now, there have been no questions submitted.
Okay.
But in the meantime, while folks are thinking, I can send out the final 2 polling questions.
Sounds great.
All right. So before we do wrap up, and again, please submit any questions. We'll stop this and answer your questions right away. The first one, though, is if you are interested in subscribing to the Environmental Finance Center blog, if you're unsure about the blog or do not have the opportunity to submit your answer today, you can sign up for the blog on our efcnetwork.org website. And we'll leave this poll open for another 5 seconds. Getting ready to close this poll in 3, 2, 1. And lastly, if you are interested in receiving in-depth technical assistance for your water system, please let us know. If you're unsure about technical assistance or do not have the opportunity to submit your polling answer today, you can learn more about technical assistance and review the form on our efcnetwork.org website. And getting ready to close this poll in 3, 2, 1. And it looks like we did receive a question, Dawn. Are you ready?
I am.
So how do we get to the tools from the resource library?
There are questions that pop up that ask you what you're facing, and you will want to pick the question that deals with financial and rates, and then a list of resources will come up. There is a list of documents, a list of tools, and the spreadsheets that I talked about should be listed there under the tools. So if you can't get to it, feel free to send me an email, but otherwise it should be, you answer that, you click the question that is related to rates and finances, and all of the resources should pop up.
Wonderful. And, I will make sure that I am following up with you to ensure that all of this follow-up material is included in the email that attendees will receive. And so there haven't been any more questions, so I am shooting out a link in the chat box. It's to a survey. If you could just give us, 5 minutes of your time to let us know how you thought today's session went, and you will, again, be receiving a follow-up email an hour after this session, and then about 2 weeks detailing how to access and download those slides. And so, Dawn, to retrack, the attendee tested out how to access the resources, and and it was mentioned that when they click on the tool, it takes her to a link to get the info on a product. That's the correct process, right?
Yes.
Perfect. And then we do have one more question. Are you ready?
Yes.
So is asset management a good substitute to prevent having to have expensive CIPs?
I don't know if it's a substitute. I think what it does is gives you a better picture of what assets need to be replaced within the next 5 years, the next 20 years, the next 50 years. We often just look at a 5-year CIP, and again, it's often a wish list or an emergency type list more than it is a data-driven list. And asset management really helps you get to a 5-year CIP, a 20-year, a 50-year, and even a 100-year CIP when none of us will be around, but will help the utility's longevity be able to plan for what's coming. So if we just put new pipe in, we can know that in about 100 years, it's going to need some attention. So I think it helps us have better CIPs. So maybe not as expensive, maybe more expensive if we haven't thought about the fact that the storage tank is going to need to be replaced in 3 to 5 years. But now asset management's helped highlight that that's a critical asset. Without that storage tank, we can't provide pressure to any of our customers, and we better be thinking about getting that on the list. So I don't know if it changes how expensive your CIP is, but it does make it much more data-based, which I think is much easier to justify and explain than the way that we're currently putting projects into our CIP.
Thank you, Dawn. Well, let's see. The attendee says thank you.
You're welcome.
So, we are coming up on the top of the hour here, so I just want to thank Dawn for providing her expertise on asset management for small systems in Minnesota. And I want to thank all the attendees who have joined us today. Dawn, I will throw it back to you for any additional closing comments.
Thank you for your time and your attendance, and if you have any questions, please let us know. We would love to help you out.
All right, have a great afternoon, everyone. Bye-bye.